In this episode, we'll show you how we made this partition wall in this carport. And this involved installing a post bracket into the concrete, building a wall that was pretty much like a fence, and installing this barn style door. So let's get started.
The idea is to wall this off, have junk, kayaks, bicycles, tools, stuff in there, and a nicer sitting area over here where you're not looking in at all this junk. The basic plan is to just frame out a really simple wall here with a post and then a basic frame that we can put Western red cedar fence planks on the front of, and then build and hang a really similar door right here that will have barn door attachment at the top so that it slides in this direction.
So the first step is going to be figuring out where to put the base of the post, which is going to be 3 feet from that one there. And we need to make sure it's between that post and that post. And to do that, we're going to clamp a 2x4 between those two posts. And we're only making it level so we can see how slanted this carport floor is.
And unfortunately, this vertical post isn't lined up perfectly with that joist on either side.
Then we measured from the carport floor to the joist, trying to hold the tape measure as vertical or plumb as possible.
Don't try this at home, kids.
Subtracted out the height of the joist bracket, and use this handy app that does math in inches and feet. And with the measurement transferred to the wood, we still cut it a little bit wide because it's always better to test the fit and cut a little bit more off if needed. We also clamped a second 2x4 up higher on the posts. And that created a nice plane so that we could line up our post.
Okay.
As expected, it was still too long, so we marked it with a Sharpie and cut a bit more off.
Okay, so we got it down there. And it's meeting up there well enough.
Next, we want to make sure that the space between this post and the existing post was 3 feet for our doorway.
So now we have this 3-foot board at the bottom. Oh, I was gonna show you holding the 3-foot board up top. So that's the 3-foot gap there too.
Since this is only a test fit, we wanted to make sure we're on the right track. So we used this post level, and also notice that this longer level was much more accurate.
Steve, could you just post up right there and do your level best on that?
Finally, we marked out the location of the base with some tape, and also put some tape on the joist, just so when we're putting the post back up, we can get it closer to its final location. Now we can take it down, so we can install that piece there. With the post out of the way, we trace that oblong hole onto the concrete with a Sharpie, and use this rotary hammer to drill a hole.
Oh, that's going backwards. There we go.
And you can see here, the drill bit might walk across the surface a bit, so I'm steering the drill to get it right where I want it. And soon enough,
Oh, there we go, we got through it. It worked so quickly. So we're gonna use this sleeve anchor, which you work by putting that into the hole. And then this part, as you can see, is tapered. And as you tighten this nut, it pulls that taper up through this sleeve, which then expands along this little seam here in the hole and holds it firm. Not like my grip.
and here I'm making a silly mistake that hopefully you can avoid.
Uh-oh. All right, the threaded rod for this fell in there because I took the nut off to see what size driver we needed for that. So I'm gonna try and get it out with some super glue and a Q-tip. Okay, so let's see. Look at that. Ta-da! We got it out. So we assembled this before we put it back in the hole. Now we can put that there. Okay, ready? That's not going anywhere. And so you can see how far the threads have come out just as we've tightened that nut. There we go. All right, so we're gonna use these 4-inch screws to secure the top of this post to the joist up there. And it's gonna go something like this, you know, diagonally through the post. And I'm gonna start some pilot holes here and get this screw started while it's down low and easier to access. As you can see, it's kind of hard to start a hole like this. So I always just start a little bit going straight into the wood, and then you can get it to the catch.
So here I'm starting the screw in the wood, But I soon realized that all the points of the screws are going to converge at the center of the post. So I realized I should make the screws offset from the center of each side of the post.
We got all those started, so that should be pretty easy. It doesn't fit anymore. Huh. So now it's like a 1/16 of an inch or something. I wish I could, oh. I didn't think that would work. So let's check all the levels.
But first, we put our 3-foot door spacers back in.
It could go your way a little bit, actually. Or, hey Tom, so you can see that? That's nice and level there. And I will check this back side. So that means, yeah, we need to move it towards you.
Like where it was.
That actually looks perfect. We should be able to screw it all in. Let's check that again. Yeah, that's straight up and down.
And from there, it is simply a matter of driving in our 4 screws up top.
All right, we're just gonna secure this with 6 screws. And maybe ideally they would be not these tapered head screws, they'd be just kind of flat across, but this works.
And of course, 3 on the other side.
I really like these post supports because the wood isn't going all the way to the ground, so if it does get wet down here, it's not gonna be the wood that gets wet, it'll just be this galvanized metal. For the next step, we're gonna put our first board between the posts down low. And so we have it resting on this other one so we can measure out where to cut it. I'll cut it a little bit proud and sneak up on it, like always. So before you get too excited on the left side, we'll get the level on there.
Yeah.
That's looking pretty darn good.
Using the same technique as before, I drilled some pilot holes and then drove in some 3-inch screws.
Smooth.
And before we can figure out the position of our upper rail, we need to see what the pickets look like.
That cedar board and that cedar board should be at the same height. And there's of course a bigger gap down here than over here because the concrete is sloped. But that's what it should look like side to side, really.
Based on that, we put the upper rail at a height so that the pickets would stick as far above that as they do below the lower rail.
I found this pretty useful in the past. We want the board to go right there. So I'm gonna put the clamp right there so it can rest on it. And we'll do the same on the other side. Ah, easy. Look at that.
And as usual, it's best to take the time to make sure it's level. And that ensured that the distance between our rails was the same on each end.
68, 68. I'm happy with that.
Finally, it was the usual screws to secure it in place. Since there was 68 inches between rails, we thought it might be a good idea to have one in the center. And for this one, we used other 2x4s and clamps to make sure we were securing it flush with the face of the post. We need to continue the upper rail above the door, so we used a similar technique and level to put that in place.
How's that looking from there, like in terms of this line continuing?
Perfect.
Tom thought it would be nice to copy the pattern of the pickets on the fence, so we ripped a bunch of the cedar boards in half.
So we want to start putting the cedar slats on the door side of this wall. And Tom had the great idea to put a board all across the top that we can then just butt the cedar up to. And so obviously it's further off the ground down there, but over there we made it so it's just about ½ an inch off the ground.
So we started with a wide picket at the edge of the door and nailed it in.
And Tom's driving them in at angles so that it helps hold the board in better. Okay, and we're using the edge of this speed square as a shim or as a spacer.
And we used it as a spacer at each rail.
Holy moly!
Okay, well, there's a wrapper on it.
He doesn't care.
Recharged with some experimental cupcakes, Tom and Steve finished the rest of the wall, and you can see how good that top edge looks.
Okay, there's the wall.
That looks so good.
Up here, we needed to put one more rail so we could support shorter pickets above the door. So we cut a bunch of pieces to 13 inches long and nailed them up. So the instructions for hanging the rail say to make sure that one end is hanging at least 2 inches over the edge of the door opening. So that's why we have the green tape on the end to show how much that should be overlapping the post. We also have a piece of tape in the middle, which should be a clue to us that the door probably won't open as much as we want it to. Nonetheless, we pushed on and used a pencil to transfer the holes in the rail to the wood, then used a drill to make pilot holes, then drove in these big carriage bolts. But there is a spacer piece between the rail and the wood.
And I can hold it back and put it in the hole that I made.
And it's important to note here that this metal rail is actually parallel and along the center of the wooden rail behind all these pickets.
That's gonna be very fun. So here's a door stopper. These are little rubber pieces to have a nice soft hit. And then those are the grub screws to tighten it onto the rail.
And here Tom's using the provided Allen key to tighten down those grub screws to install the stop.
And we want maximum movement, so you can see he put it on so that it's just flush with the end of the rail.
And of course, there's one for the other side as well.
That done? Boom.
We initially assembled our very simple door frame using these metal brackets, but when we tried to square the frame, they just got bent out of shape pretty badly, so I probably wouldn't use these again. In the end, we drove in some screws from the corner like this.
To make sure that this door is square, we can measure both diagonals. And here we have 88 inches, and this way we have 87 3/4, which is pretty close. And since it's a barn door, it doesn't need to fit in the hole perfectly, so I think we'll call it good at that. So these door hangers, the first bolt hole wants to be 1.5 inches down from the top of the door and 2 inches in. So if we put it like that, we'll mark this other one here. Then we're gonna drill a hole so that this bolt can fit through. That drill bit is just big enough, so I'm gonna have to wiggle it around. Putting one of these cap nuts on the back.
And this is a mistake because a bit later, when we're testing out the door, those cap nuts were scraping against the wood of the wall. So the bolts actually have to go in from the back, and the cap nuts would be on this door hanger side. But we have to remount these anyway once we put the pickets on the front of the door. But here's how the test went.
It's so smooth. So the instructions said to make sure that the railing extends at least 2 inches beyond the door opening, which is what we've done. But then if we have our door closed, and of course it hits that door stop, our door is overlapping the door frame a lot, and we're planning on having the cedar stick 2 inches out the side of the door anyway. So really, we want the door to come to here, which means we can move the railing that far to the right.
So we remounted the railing 2 inches further to the right and tested it out.
So now when we slide the door closed, it hits there, and the side of the door is pretty much flush with the side of the post. And same with over here.
So we actually squared up this door by pushing it into the door frame, and then kept it square with this piece of wood screwed at an angle. Next, Steve and Tom covered the door with pickets in the same pattern as the wall. And we left them a bit longer at the bottom so we can determine the final length once we've hung the door. Then we had to flip it over and transfer the holes for the brackets through the pickets. But none of the bolts are long enough to go through all this wood and the door hangers, so we're going to need to countersink those bolts into the 2x4s. So without a drill press, it's pretty much impossible to run a spade bit like this on an existing hole. After a few minutes of puzzling over this, we realized we could hammer a piece of dowel into the hole, cut it flush with the saw, and have a piece of wood to center the spade bit on. So now we can drill into the wood as normal, and I've put a little piece of tape on this Allen key to measure out the depth of the countersink that we want. Finally, I put the regular drill bit back in and drill out the rest of the dowel. We did the same thing for the other holes, and then we're able to remount the door hanging hardware. And as I mentioned before, you should be able to see the cap nuts on the outside of the door. And here you can see how the heads of the bolts are nicely hidden in the wood, and we can tighten everything up with a crescent wrench. Then we hung the door again. So we purposely left those bottom ones longer, and now we'll draw a line across there take the door down and cut it off, and then we'll be done for that part, which we tried to capture here, but didn't end up recording. Finally, Tom put one last picket to cover the post on the left, and our partition wall is done. Ooh. Steve, can you model closing the door? And opening it. And here's the view from the other side. And as you can see, we have also added this nice handle. And I'm still loving how smooth this is. So if you like videos like this, you might like this one here.
Like that. That makes sense, right?